The winter wind swept across the open plains with a cruel persistence, cutting through layers of clothing and biting straight into the skin. Caleb Morgan urged his horse forward, eager to reach the safety of his ranch house before darkness fully settled in. The sky had already begun to dim into a heavy gray, promising another brutal night. His thoughts were fixed on the cattle and the dropping temperature when a lone figure near the dirt road caught his attention. At first, Caleb thought it was a scarecrow left standing by a careless neighbor. But as he drew closer, he saw the slow, unsteady movement of a man struggling to remain upright. The stranger was old, his frame thin and bent, wrapped in a tattered blanket that flapped uselessly in the wind. Frost clung to his hair and beard, and his hands shook violently as if each breath cost him effort. Caleb hesitated. Stories whispered. In town echoed in his mind, warnings, filled with fear and ignorance, but they felt hollow when faced with the reality before him. This was not a threat. This was a man on the edge of freezing to death. Caleb dismounted, the cold seeping through his boots as his feet touched the ground. He studied the old man's face, deeply lined with age and hardship, yet calm in a way that unsettled him. Without speaking, Caleb shrugged off his jacket, a heavy wool coat that had belonged to his father, and gently placed it around the man's shoulders. The warmth seemed to surprise him. His eyes widened, dark and sharp despite his age, and he pressed the jacket close to his chest as though it were something sacred. The old man spoke quietly in a language Caleb did not understand, his voice rough but steady. He placed one hand over his heart and bowed his head. For a moment the wind eased, and the vast land around them felt strangely still, as if the plains themselves were watching. Caleb nodded back, unsure why he felt compelled to do so. The old man turned and walked away, his steps firmer now, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Caleb watched until the figure was gone, then mounted his horse and rode home. That night, as the fire crackled and shadows danced on the walls, Caleb lay awake, uneasy and restless, unaware that his simple act of kindness had set something powerful into motion. Dawn broke slowly, pale light spreading across the plains like a cautious promise. Caleb Morgan stepped onto the porch with a tin cup of coffee warming his hands, expecting the familiar sounds of morning, the low calls of cattle, the creak of wood in the cold. Instead, an unnatural silence greeted him. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A strange unease settled in his chest as he lifted his eyes toward the open land beyond the fence. That was when he saw them. Figures stood in the distance, dark shapes against the frost-covered ground. At first, Caleb thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But as the light grew stronger, the shapes sharpened into men. Many men, mounted, on horses or standing firmly beside them. They stretched from one end of his property to the other, row upon row, unmoving. Feathers swayed gently from their hair, and the cold metal of spears and rifles caught the early sun. Caleb's heart began to pound so loudly he was sure they could hear it. Every story he had ever heard rushed into his mind at once. His hand twitched toward the rifle leaning against the wall. But he stopped himself. Something about the stillness of the warriors felt deliberate, controlled. They had not crossed the fence. They were waiting. Caleb stood frozen, torn between fear and a strange sense of responsibility he couldn't explain. Then movement rippled through the line. From the center, a single rider advanced slowly toward the fence. As the man drew closer, Caleb recognized him immediately. It was the old native man from the night before. He sat tall in the saddle now, wrapped in the same heavy jacket Caleb had given him, its worn sleeves unmistakable. His posture was no longer fragile. It carried authority. The rider halted a few steps from the fence and raised one hand. Instantly, every warrior behind him dismounted and lowered their heads. The sound of hooves and shifting leather faded into silence. The old man spoke, his voice strong, echoing across the open land. Though Caleb could not understand the words, he felt their weight press against his chest. A younger man stepped forward and called out in clear English, "You showed mercy to our chief when the cold would have taken his life. We have come to answer that kindness." Caleb's fear drained away, replaced by shock and awe. He stood alone on his porch, realizing that the simple choice he made the night before had drawn the attention and the respect of an entire people. The silence that followed felt heavy, as if the land itself were waiting for Caleb to respond. He set his cup down with trembling hands and stepped closer to the fence, his eyes moving from face to face. These were not men who had come in anger. Their expressions were calm, disciplined, and filled with purpose. The old man, now revealed as Chief Tallhawk, studied Caleb with a steady gaze that carried both wisdom and gratitude. With a slight motion of his hand, the chief gave a command. Instantly, the warriors sprang into action, their movements precise and practiced. Some led their horses forward and began inspecting the fence line, quietly repairing broken posts and reinforcing weak sections as if they had tended this land for years. Others carried bundles from their saddles, thick hides, cured meat, tools crafted with care, and laid them gently on the ground inside Caleb's property. There was no boasting, no loud voices, only the sound of work being done with respect. A young warrior returned to Caleb's side to translate the chief's words. "Among our people," he said, "a life saved is a bond made. You gave warmth when none was owed. In return, we offer protection and friendship." The words struck Caleb deeply. He had never thought of his act as anything more than simple decency, yet here it had grown into something far greater. Chief Tallhawk approached the fence and rested a hand upon the worn wood, then pressed his palm to his chest. "This land will not be harmed," he said slowly in broken English. "As long as our people ride these plains, this ranch is under our watch." His voice was calm, but carried undeniable authority. Caleb felt his throat tighten. He nodded, unable to find words strong enough to answer such a vow. The wind returned softly, carrying the scent of earth and frost, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt truly safe standing on his land. When the work was finished, the warriors mounted their horses in perfect unison. Chief Tallhawk lingered a moment longer, gripping Caleb's forearm firmly, his eyes warm. Then, with a final nod, he turned and rode away. Within minutes, the vast plain was empty once more, leaving behind strengthened fences, generous gifts, and a lesson Caleb would never forget, that compassion, given without fear, can echo farther than any weapon ever could.